making use of public transport a lot this summer because, for me, it's the easiest way to get around England and most efficient. My biggest complaint about public transport, though, is when people sit next to you, men especially, and they manspread like their life depends on it. It's honestly one of the most frustrating parts of taking the train for me. Like, I'd rather stand up for my entire 50-minute journey than sit down and have someone manspread next to me. And don't get me wrong, I'm not against manspreading, like, as a practice. Like, if manspreading was illegal, I'd be jailed immediately because I absolutely love to manspread and take up unnecessary amounts of space. Like, are you kidding me? It's so comfortable. It's so comfortable. Like, if I'm on a big couch, you can guarantee that I will be taking up over half of it, and I will be sitting in the most unruly, unladylike position. The difference between me and the men that manspread next to me on the train is that if somebody even so much as looks in the direction of the couch as though they want to sit down, immediately readjusting myself to make sure there's ample space for them. I just don't quite understand what makes people feel entitled to taking up that much space when there's someone next to them, let alone sitting right next to them. I just don't get it. Since I was a kid, I always noticed this and found it really weird because from a young age, before I even fully understood what gender discrimination was, I could tell that something about this phenomenon, manspreading, of course I didn't know it had a name back then, but I could tell it had some arbitrary connection to gender. Because why was it always the men taking up all the space and women forcing themselves to take up as little space as possible? Little kid me didn't really understand what was going on, but whatever it was, she was vehemently against it. And I think that's why I grew up to be such a manspreader, honestly, and despise ladylike ways of sitting. Older me now, of course, understands the gendered nature of manspreading and the history of women being told to take up less space. But I recently read an article by Shannon Sullivan called Ontological Expansiveness, which added another dimension to this phenomenon. She talks about this idea of people from socially privileged groups feeling that they have the right to take up as much space as they want, and feeling entitled to any space. So I thought I'd break down her argument so that we can understand the root of these habits and practices and why men think it's okay to manspread in public. Sullivan defines ontological expansiveness as a person's unconscious habit of assuming that all spaces are rightfully available for the person to enter comfortably. It's like a state of mind in which one believes that they have the right to exist in whatever space they want to. And this doesn't apply only to physical space. The space can be geographical, but it can also be metaphorical, artistic, etc. It most commonly occurs amongst people in dominant groups or people with social privilege. So, as I mentioned earlier, manspreading is a common example of ontological expansiveness. Men have a felt sense that it's their right to manspread and that they shouldn't be denied of it. They have a presumptuous sense of entitlement attached to the act of manspreading because they feel as though the space is free for them to take up. Some men even think that for them to give up their ontological expansiveness in this way, so to stop manspreading, is to feminize themselves. And for this reason, they continue manspreading so as not to be emasculated. For them, part of being a man is taking up as much space as you please with no justification for it. So again, there's this sense of entitlement that they bring, which translates to ontological expansiveness. While ontological expansiveness very aptly describes manspreading and other phenomena wherein men feel entitled to a particular space, it was initially developed to explain racial privilege of white people. They often feel that they have the right to traverse all spaces, even predominantly non-white spaces. They don't believe that their whiteness should be a barrier preventing them from entering certain spaces. How this sometimes manifests is that white people may feel that their denial of entry into non-white spaces is an act of reverse racism, when it's instead the fault of their ontological expansiveness. It's a simple fact that not all spaces are welcome to all people. Social groups are entitled to have spaces just for the people of that group so that they can use it as an escape or to talk about things experienced by virtue of being a part of that social group. So for someone to victimize themselves when they aren't allowed into a certain space, this shows off their inflated ego and ontological expansiveness. A prominent example of ontological expansiveness is with white anti-racists who believe that their anti-racism is a ticket into spaces of color. Sullivan gives an example from Sarah Ahmed on this point. Ahmed attended a conference which ended up being predominantly white, and at one point during the conference, there were breakout sessions, one of which being a caucus for people of color. She attended this space that was supposed to be for POC, but when she arrived, there were still white people present, even in this area that was specifically designated for people of color. They explained that they were there with the interest of learning of allyship. However, even though they had good reasons for being there, this is an example of ontological expansiveness, causing people to believe that their entry is warranted in all spaces. Again, although the intention was good-natured, their attendance at this caucus was doing more harm than good because it was preventing the people of color at the event from having a space of their own. So why does it occur then? Firstly, the regulation of ontological expansiveness takes place via habit. Sullivan describes habit as a predisposition to engage with the world in particular ways that often are not consciously chosen. Ontological expansiveness is an example of an unconscious habit. These habits are difficult to identify and therefore difficult to overcome, and they're often socially painful to acknowledge. As Sullivan notes, for example, habits of male privilege. They become so normalized that it can be difficult to identify. And identifying these unconscious habits in oneself is even more difficult. Thus, one continues to practice these habits. And this is what occurs with ontological expansiveness. Secondly, ontological expansiveness is related to spatiality. It denies the lived spatiality of a space. A space gains its lived spatiality by means of the intentional bodies moving and living in it. So a given space derives its meaning from the individuals that regularly exist in the space, not just through its objective space or geographical location. Sullivan says that this spatial orientation is both personal and social because it's related to both the individual on their own and the histories of the bodies that give it meaning. By denying lived spatiality from a space, one treats all space as objective. Treating space as objective is the reason that people, often racist, sometimes argue that individuals are unnecessarily inserting race into situations where it has no bearing. They think all space is equally impartial and thus belongs equally to anyone, regardless of race. It effectively works as a spatial version of white colorblindness. For most white people, these spaces were never colored to begin with. So, if we return to the example which Ahmed raised, the white people that entered this space, this caucus, didn't understand that this space was colored. They saw the space as being open to anyone, and some were even annoyed when the POC in the room alluded to the fact that the space was actually colored and therefore only open to people of color. One thing which ontological expansiveness can often be connected to is white fragility. The term white fragility is frequently thrown around, but it refers to a sense of discomfort or unease, sometimes even defensiveness, that white people feel surrounding discussions about racial inequality. Sullivan describes it as an inability to undergo a racial experience in which one's whiteness is challenged. In these contexts, white people can get sensitive about their whiteness and try to defend themselves against any potential accusations of racism. But this ends up strengthening one's habits of ontological expansiveness. The feelings of insecurity and sensitivity which come with white fragility can lead to the individual demanding emotional comfort in whatever space they're in turn, bolstering their ontological expansiveness. So what this endless cycle between ontological expansiveness and white fragility can lead to is psychic freedom. This is because white people are used to situations in which they don't have to critically think about their race and the foregrounding of their whiteness. They're not bound by racial considerations in the way that people of color often are, so they're able to engage in this sense of freedom. But this means that the psychic labor that comes with managing racial spaces falls onto POC. This takes a large toll out of POC, and it can lead to things like microaggressions against people of color. And not only does ontological expansiveness absolve people in socially privileged groups from feelings of discomfort and from witnessing the realities of race, but it also harms people from non-dominant groups in the process, as they have to deal with the effects of those with the habit of ontological expansiveness or an inflated ego. In other words, men's habits of ontological expansiveness cause me to suffer, because now I have to sit next to a manspreader. So let's all be cognizant about the ways that these unconscious habits affect the people around us. And if you're on a train, please remember personal space is a thing, and it's super cool to respect it.